On paper, Russia won the economic war against the West. After 4 years of the most aggressive sanctions ever aimed at a major economy, Moscow is still standing with a technically growing economy. The ruble went through a major dip and rebounded to levels close to those before the war. And Vladimir Putin keeps telling the world that time is on Russia's side. But here's what the paper doesn't show you. By the start of 2026, the liquid reserves in Russia's rainy day fund, the National Wealth Fund, the cushion built to absorb exactly this kind of shock, had been more than halved in dollar terms. Measured against the size of the economy, it had shrunk by roughly 2.4 times, and the federal budget deficit blew past the official plan by roughly 5 times. That's not the picture of a country that's adapted. That's the picture of a country burning through its savings to keep a war going and quietly hoping nobody does the math. Today, we're doing the math because beneath that stable surface, Russia is carrying 10 structural weaknesses. While none of them are likely to cause a total collapse, every single one of them is getting worse, and several of them feed each other. Number 1. The budget, or lack thereof. Let's start with the money, because everything else flows from it. In 2021, the year before the invasion, defense and internal security ate up about 24% of Russia's federal budget. By 2025, that figure had climbed to about 40%. The exact number is difficult to determine because Russia keeps classifying spending on defense projects. In fact, some sources suggest that classified spending is at least as much as nominal spending. For example, in just the first 3 quarters of 2025, a staggering 7 trillion rubles, roughly $88 billion, was allocated to these closed budget items. That represented a massive 39% increase compared to the same period the year before. Now, look at the income side. And that's where Russia is truly in trouble. Russia built its 2025 budget, assuming oil would sell at around $70 a barrel, but it actually averaged $58. The government also bet on a weaker ruble to pad its revenue, but the ruble stayed stubbornly strong. The result is that oil and gas revenue fell by nearly a quarter year on year, while spending kept climbing. So Moscow did what any government drowning in red ink does. It rewrote the budget, even twice in a single year. The deficit still ballooned to 5.6 trillion rubles, about 5 times what was planned. Add in struggling regional budgets and the pension and health funds, and the total hole in Russia's public finances hit 8.3 trillion rubles. That's nearly 4% of the entire economy. Cut off from Western lending, the Kremlin can either borrow at home at brutal interest rates or raid the National Wealth Fund. And it's doing both. While the fund is half gone in dollar terms, and that's even after record-high gold prices help prop up its value. The situation is so bad that the government was forced to propose a reduction in military spending for 2026. According to SIPRI, this measure is also likely to be amended to increase the budget. But all this does is further show why Russia is slowly being drained of money. It can't keep up its economic growth, and yet it needs to continue funneling more money into the military in order not to be seen as weak or attempt to make progress. Eventually, it's going to be a lose-lose situation. Number 2. The dependence on China. The second issue stems partially from the first, concerning Russia's economy. Because when Europe piled on with sanctions, Russia was forced to find other vendors. China proved to be a willing partner. In 2025, China took around 30% of everything Russia exports, up from 16% before the war. It supplied roughly 35% of Russia's imports. And in the categories that actually keep a war economy running, like machinery, industrial equipment, and spare parts, China's share has climbed as high as 90%. All you need to do is look at the car market to see the takeover in real time. In 2019, Chinese brands made up just 2% of new cars sold in Russia. By 2025, they accounted for slightly more than half. Western automakers walked out, Russia's own production collapsed, and Beijing filled the vacuum. Even the aforementioned National Wealth Fund now leans on China, as the Chinese yuan makes up close to 60% of its liquid reserves. But the relationship is wildly lopsided, as trade with Russia is barely 3% of China's exports. For Beijing, Russia is a minor customer. For Moscow, China is the whole game, and China knows it. So Beijing dictates terms. It demands steep discounts on Russian oil and coal, up to 50% of the price Russia used to charge Europe. It also drags its feet on the gas pipelines Moscow is desperate to build. Like Power of Siberia 2, hedging on providing complete details on financing the project on its end. Even after a meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping and saying that it understands Russia's need to expedite the project, China didn't provide an updated timeline. China also refuses to invest in Russian production or hand over advanced technology. It'll happily sell Russia finished goods and strip out its raw materials, but it won't help Russia actually develop. So Russia traded a dependency on the West it resented for a dependency on China it can't escape. Number 3. The technology issues. A modern military runs on modern technology, and Russia is being slowly starved of it. For 30 years, the West has practically controlled Russia's modern economy. The EU and the United States accounted for about 2/3 of all foreign direct investment in the country. Then the invasion flipped the switch. Foreign investment that stood at roughly $500 billion at the end of 2021 had more than cut in half. And the worst thing is that nobody is rushing in to replace it, not even China. Most imports from China are unrelated to direct military operations. Sure, China has been selling drones in droves, but it's also supplied commercial drone models used by Ukraine, playing both sides for its economic benefit. The combination of a stagnating economy and dependence on a partner that doesn't allow advanced technology exports means that Russia is slowly losing its status as one of the most technologically advanced countries. Russia spends barely 1% of its economy on research and development, compared to 3.3% in the United States or nearly 5% in South Korea. And given that this could mean less and less money each year, Russia is falling further behind, with a big chunk of what little it does spend going straight to the military, not the civilian economy. Then there's the fact that Russia is also losing access to one of its main abilities to fund growth, as Ukraine has been hammering Russian oil refineries with long-range drone strikes. In a normal country, you fix the damage and restart. But Russian refineries are also stuffed with Western equipment, leftovers from decades of importing technology it didn't have. And the spare parts are sanctioned, so plants that get hit can't get the components or the servicing to come back online quickly. A single drone can take a refinery offline for weeks, choking the domestic fuel supply and forcing the state into costly emergency interventions. Number 4. The worker black hole. Even if Russia could manage to fix all its oil refineries and re-establish all trade lines to the world, chances are it couldn't really service them in time. That's because the country has one of the most paradoxical demographic issues, a low unemployment rate of only 2.1% in late 2025. While this would sound like an economic boon to the uninitiated, it's actually the opposite. Most Western countries have had unemployment rates ranging from around 6.4% for the past 4 years. As a quick reminder, the unemployment rate is calculated by dividing the number of unemployed people by the total number in the labor force, then multiplying the result by 100. And sure, the world was hit by a major pandemic, but the unemployment rate actually dropped from pre-COVID levels. But Russia has somewhere between 1.5 and 2 million unfilled jobs, and there simply aren't enough workers to go around. Worse yet, the reasons are stacking on top of each other. For one, the population is aging fast, as there are roughly 7.5 million more Russians in their 60s than in their 20s. The big generations are retiring, and the small generations born in the chaotic 1990s can't step in to replace them in large numbers. The war made the issue dramatically worse. Hundreds of thousands of working-age men were pulled into the army or killed at the front. Hundreds of thousands also fled the country to avoid mobilization. And these were often the IT specialists and engineers with the means and skills that Russia needed. And the Kremlin's crackdown on migrants slammed the door on the labor that used to fill the gaps. Then there's an issue where the country is so strapped for soldiers to send to the front line that it continues boosting conscription bonuses. In 2025, some of the regions reported that a yearly wage for a new contract soldier with the initial bonus would be 4.5 times higher than the average yearly salary. And this triggers a chain reaction. High wages in the military mean too few workers elsewhere, which means wages spiral upward faster than productivity, which feeds inflation. So there aren't enough people for Russian jobs, and yet those jobs that exist don't pay for the things Russia needs. The non-essentials market, like the automotive industry, is a great indicator here. In the second half of 2025, Russian car makers Avtovaz, Kamaz and Gaz were so squeezed by truck sales falling by half that they cut back to a 4-day work week. This only means that the workers are making less money and the cycle continues. Number 5. The demographic death spiral. That worker shortage connects directly to the darkest number in this entire report. Russia has had a shrinking population for most of the last 3 decades. The fertility rate hit a low in the 1990s and never truly recovered for long enough to matter. It went from a historic low of 1.16 in 1999 to a so-called high of 1.78 in 2015 and then slumped back down to 1.4 in 2023. Immigration used to bridge the gap, but even that stopped working as the net migration turned negative in 2022. The country is simply getting smaller with lower fertility rates and more people leaving the country than coming in. Then came the war. Independent estimates, piecing together public records, put the number of Russian soldiers killed at the front at least 220,000 by May 2026. The last time Russia's defense ministry published a death toll was September 2022, when it claimed fewer than 6,000 had died. The gap between the propaganda and the graveyards is enormous, and the Kremlin keeps the real figures confidential so you can't see it. So what's the Kremlin's answer? Not the kind of policy that might actually work. Instead, it makes financial incentives for pregnant schoolgirls, new restrictions on abortion, and crackdowns on the very migrants the economy can't survive without. This is the spiral. The war kills working-age men. Fewer men mean fewer workers and fewer fathers. Fewer fathers mean fewer children. Fewer children means an even smaller workforce a generation from now. The war is essentially removing Russia's future. The war is also far from over and is increasingly starting to impact Russians in large cities, which brings us directly to the next point. But before we do that, make sure you're subscribed to the Military Show for more daily analytics like these. We track everything in global geopolitics, so you stay informed. Number 6. The veterans who came home violent. Now, some of the soldiers do come home, and for a growing number of Russian communities, that's its own catastrophe. Russia filled its ranks in part by recruiting convicted criminals straight from prisons with the promise of a pardon. It threw traumatized, often brutalized men into the meat grinder, then sent the survivors back into civilian life with no real support, no rehabilitation, and a pardon in their pocket. The result is exactly what you'd expect. According to tallies by the independent outlet Vyurtska, veterans returning from Ukraine had killed or seriously injured more than 1,000 people back home by late 2025, with at least 551 killed. And those are only the documented cases. The crime data backs it up, as 2024 saw the highest number of serious crimes in Russia in 14 years, and the trend kept climbing into 2025. The violence clusters are also where you'd expect, in the regions bordering Ukraine and increasingly in some of Russia's ethnic minority regions. This is poison for the Kremlin in a way sanctions never could be. The Russian army has always been an object of national pride. Now ordinary Russians are watching pardoned killers walk their streets and reading accounts of commanders torturing their own men and sending the wounded back to die. The myth of the heroic soldier that Russia is so desperate to publicize is curdling into fear. And the state has essentially done nothing. No serious rehabilitation program, no tougher sentencing, because acknowledging the problem means acknowledging the war created it, and the tightened budget means there's not enough money to create far-reaching government programs for mental health. Even the newly established Defenders of the Fatherland State Fund, which is supposed to provide psychological counseling, has a very limited scope and doesn't help the people who need it most. With more and more soldiers returning home, the public is becoming aware of just how problematic the war has become, which directly ties into the next problem. Number 7. War fatigue breaking through. Now, more and more people have gotten tired of the war, and the constant propaganda from the Kremlin is no longer enough to contain that dissatisfaction. This has created a bit of a paradox at the heart of Russian public opinion. People will tell pollsters they support the war, but want it to end at the same time. As of February 2026, in surveys by the independent Levada Center, about 72% of Russians said they backed the army's actions in Ukraine. And yet, support for opening peace negotiations hit 67%, which was a record high, while the share who wanted the fighting to continue fell to just 24%. That's the lowest number for continuing the war since the invasion began in February 2022. Think about what that means. Roughly 2/3 of the country now wants out, even as most still say they back the troops. Essentially, the population has stopped believing in the mission, but hasn't found a way to say so out loud. Support for negotiations is also highest among women, among Russians under 40, among rural residents, and above all, among people who get their news from social media and YouTube rather than state television. The Kremlin still owns the airwaves, but it doesn't own the internet, and the generation that grew up online is the generation least willing to keep fighting. There's one crucial catch, and it's the Kremlin's last refuge. When Russians say they want negotiations, most actually mean a favorable end on Russia's terms. For example, more than half say that if peace can't be reached yet, Russia should hit Ukraine even harder. But that exhaustion simply means that people think Russia should step up the attacks, while there's no one actually there to do the attacking. Mobilization has slowed in early 2026, with contract recruitment reportedly falling around 20% compared to 2025 as sign-ups become harder to sustain. And when the population is that tired and passive, it's also much more likely to resist an open mobilization, which would arguably be Russia's only tool of getting enough manpower to finish the war on its terms. Number 8. The country is physically falling apart. Russia's basic infrastructure hails from the Soviet era, and it hasn't been kept up with the times. So when the war came and the budget got strained, the government tried to do its best to tighten its belt by reducing already sporadic maintenance. The winter of 2023 into 2024 brought the worst wave of breakdowns in 2 decades, with heat and water cutting out for potentially millions of people in the dead of winter. And in January 2026 alone, Russia logged nearly 1,800 separate disruptions to electricity, water, and heating, roughly double the same month a year earlier. And here's the insult on top of the injury. Even as the pipes burst, the bills go up. Utility tariffs jumped an average of 12% in mid-2025, more than 20% in some regions, hitting pensioners and the rural poor hardest. Even the more recent infrastructure is falling, this time to Russian propaganda. In an effort to protect itself from drone attacks, the Russian government has taken to systematically removing internet access across the regions closest to Ukraine or holding vital military targets. It also started banning the widely popular social media app Telegram, replacing it with a domestically made bootleg, Max. But the latter has been found to have severe security issues, to the point where the government also suggested soldiers return to Telegram instead. You can see why this is politically radioactive. Russians can tolerate a war fought by nameless people coming from poor regions, but when that war is directly cutting into the heat supply for the far-off regions or the internet access in the large population centers, it's suddenly much harder to ignore. The Kremlin's plan for this has been to modernize using foreign investments that are no longer coming, and Ukraine has started rolling out more long-range weapons, which means the internet shutdowns will only get bolder as the government tries to contain the news. But all that effort is only partial, since a lot of it gets eaten up by the system. Number 9. Corruption eating the war machine. Every ruble Russia spends on this war passes through one of the most corrupt systems on earth, and a staggering share of it never reaches the front. Before the war, analysts estimated that as much as 2/3 of the value of state contracts could be siphoned off. Total corruption losses ran to more than 1/3 of budget revenue, around 6.2% of the entire economy. Then the war created more defense contracts, fortification budget, and soldier payments, all of it ripe for theft. In spring 2024, the Kremlin launched a dramatic purge of the defense ministry, arresting senior officials. It opened criminal cases over stolen money in the border regions of Kursk, Bryansk, and Belgorod, the same regions that were supposed to be fortified against Ukraine. But these anti-corruption campaigns aren't meant to stop the stealing. They're meant to simply replace the recipient with someone more malleable and in line with the current program, while keeping everyone else loyal through fear. Which paradoxically makes the system more unstable, not less. When the rules are arbitrary and your protection can vanish overnight, the smart move is to grab as much as you can as fast as you can. So the theft accelerates until there's nobody left to do the stealing except one. Number 10. The center of Russia. Which brings us to the weakness that sits underneath all the others, the one that explains how Russia ended up here in the first place. Russia is not really a government, it's one man, surrounded by people whose entire job is to agree with him. Putin makes the big decisions alone, in secret, consulting only a tiny circle. There's no real debate, no independent check, and few people whose careers survive telling him something he doesn't want to hear. Loyalty matters more than competence, and in a system like that, everyone tells the boss what he wants to be true. This has had massive consequences that dramatically affected the duration of the war. Many analysts believe Putin went into this invasion confident it would be over in days. For years, he'd been telling that Russians and Ukrainians were one people, that Ukraine sat on historically Russian land, that its government was a hollow Western puppet that would collapse the moment Russia pushed. He believed Russia would be hailed as liberators. In July 2021, he delivered a long essay denying Ukraine's existence as a genuine nation, which was then made required reading for the Russian military. And when Russian intelligence services went looking for the current state in Ukraine, they already knew the answer the boss wanted. The FSB fed the Kremlin reports that Ukrainians wouldn't fight, that Kyiv would fall in days, and that Russian troops might even be welcomed. So Russia launched the largest war in Europe since 1945, based on intelligence that had been basically manufactured to flatter Putin. Nobody in the room could say, "Mr. President, this is wrong." And that same system runs both the country and the War Council. Arguably, the worst part is that everything depends on Putin personally, without a successor or a mechanism for what happens when he's gone. If something happens to Putin, and given his advanced age, that something is becoming increasingly likely, Russia might enter a free-for-all for the remaining ruling class for what's left of the government to strip it for parts. But perhaps the biggest problem is that all these effects are feeding one another to the point where the war is no longer as consequential. If the war stopped tomorrow, Russia would still be devastated. To learn more, check out this video. And make sure to subscribe to The Military Show for daily news on global events.